Here comes tomorrow, shining with promise, bright, brave new worlds for you to explore. If you don't like it, just hang around, cause tomorrow's tomorrow will reset the score. You can fight to turn the tide, try to rewrite, or just take flight, but you can't change the simple fact that it's where all your hopes are hiding. Here comes tomorrow.
Hello, homos, sapiens, and superior alike. My name is Josephine Raceman.
And I'm Becca Petunia.
We are two trans women here to talk about non-binary writer, largely about non-binary writer Grant Morrison's turn of the Millennium Comics run in the X-Men and what it tells us about finding joy in a world that hates and fears us. We'll talk about some other things this particular episode as well, and we're probably gonna have to update that intro, but more on that later. In other words,
Here comes tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Hey, that wasn't too bad. Yeah. Here comes tomorrow. Tomorrow is here. Tomorrow, the storyline passed, but tomorrow continues to arrive in this crazy world of ours. How you been,
Well,
Becca?
Josie, I think that that's such a great thing to say because you know what? One thing that I can count on in the world right now is that tomorrow is only a day away. And honestly, right now for you, it's less than a day away. It's like 12 hours away for you.
That's
So
right. That's right.
works out great.
I thought we were just gonna say the slogan for the early 90s X-Men cartoon, which was the only thing you can expect is the unexpected, which sort of feels like every day there's some new unexpected thing that I don't want to know or that has occurred. But yeah, are you keeping your head above water for the most part?
Mostly, again, like I said, things are still, knock on wood, but things are still pretty good out here in my neck of the woods. I'm still
Good,
doing
good.
well with the baseline being trans woman in the United States, but hey, New York is a good place to be.
Sure. And you've been having, well, we don't have to get too much into it, but do you want to plug your other podcast here? We always talk about it at the end, but I feel like you've been sort of active in the Tough Pigs world. We can cut this if you want, but is that worth talking about here? I just want to give you a chance to
Oh,
cross
I
promote if
mean,
you wanted.
oh, please. But we're kind of we're still between seasons on Prairie Dawn Companion. Although season two, I am working on it. It will happen.
Great.
But I really, it feels like that keeps coming up lately, which is I think what you're talking about is I keep winding up
Yeah.
replugging it to our different friends. And let me tell you something. I'm still incredibly proud of it, and I know what you're thinking. You at home are sitting there thinking, well, I'm here for X-Men and Marvel. I don't like I like the Muppets fine, but like they're
There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of crossover, but go
Well,
on. Yeah.
the two podcasts certainly have a lot of crossover. And not just because my podcast also in episode 7 features music from the woman who wrote our theme song, Rachel Garrett Steele.
That
Episode
is
7
right.
features another original song by her. There's a lot of crossover. And actually, Josie, you know what? Let's put that on hold because you know what? I think that that's going to tie into what we're doing today, actually.
That's fine. Great. I love that.
I really appreciate you trying to hype me up, but I'm gonna be hyping myself up here in a second.
I
Um,
can't wait.
so today, what we're doing on Here Comes Tomorrow, as we sort of do this mid-season sporadic episodes, just to remind you guys that we're here,
We still exist. Yes, right.
and we're queer, and we're queer.
And you have to get used to it.
Yeah, well, listen, I've had a long time to get used to it.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
right.
But what we're going to do today is we're going to actually do a Q&A episode. So on our last episode and Blue Sky, we solicited questions of our audience. We said they could ask questions about anything, although mostly they asked about X-Men.
Fair point. Fair cop.
Yeah, listen, we don't have a podcast about the Monkey Island games, although I know you wish you did.
So
Um
maybe it's harder to build a listener base with that keyword on SEO.
Yeah, well, listen. Um, you podcast like a dairy farmer, Josie.
Oh, how
Um,
appropriate. I'm not gonna say the repost. I would never say that. Anyway, but
but
so
so we got
we're
some
gonna look at your
questions.
questions, yeah. And I will fully confess, I thought maybe this would be more fun, slash I am also coming off of a stomach ailment and I'm going in largely blind. I have looked at the questions, but I have not like schemed out my answers. And some of them were really interesting and provocative. So watch out for me figuring out my own thoughts live on the air.
Yeah, well, listen, wouldn't be the first time either of us did that. Let's be real.
That's
Um,
true.
so we're gonna start with a question that came to us via email, from the lovely Matt Shepard,
Yes.
and he writes, just check the pronouns. Yes, okay.
Yeah, we should check the pronouns
Yep.
and also we don't need to read the whole email. Where do you think we
Yeah,
should
he's
start
got a
it?
long one, but I think it's kind of interesting his,
It is interesting.
which is why
Yeah.
I might read the whole thing.
Go ahead and
Ellie,
read it, and
okay.
if we want
Yeah,
to
but
chop it up, we
anyway,
can do that later.
he writes, "Ahoy, Josie and Petunia by proxy. Thanks for the podcast. I've really enjoyed it. One top of mind question is recommendations for other podcasts that do what you do in terms of integrating trans views, ideas, and issues into discussions of other topics." He goes on to talk a little bit about how there's some tension with the metaphor. He
Correct,
says he
which
started
yeah.
listening as a fan of the Morrison run on X-Men and have really appreciated the depth of analysis and ideas this lens has brought to it. So I'm going to pause there because he has another question, but let's start there. Are there any other podcasts you can think to recommend that integrate trans views, ideas, and issues into other topics? Because one I'm going to recommend to you, Matt Shepard, is a podcast called A Prairie Dawn Companion, which you
Great
can
call.
which you can access on the Muppet Fan Podcasts with toughpigs.com feed. Because in that podcast, I'm similarly taking a cultural touchstone that you can kind of just enjoy on its own, and people usually enjoy just on its own, and looking at it, admittedly, through more of a gender lens in general than a transgender lens. Although we do get into trans issues occasionally, especially in the episode I mentioned earlier with Rachel Garrett Steele, episode
Yes.
7, The Ballad of Rodeo Rosie, deals a lot with transition. But yeah, it's so interesting because I think I struggled with this answer because I didn't just want the answer to be my podcast, and be like, hey, who's
No, I'm fine with that because I'm keep going, but I'm really glad you didn't say my answer, which I worried was going to be the easy baseline answer. But you keep going.
I will say, Jay and Miles explain the X-Men, which you probably
God darn
already
it!
know. Was that your
I was going to
answer?
recommend. Well,
Okay,
because here's the
Josie,
thing.
take it.
I was specifically going to recommend if you. So Jay and Miles explain the X-Men, which is kind of the sine qua non in some ways of this podcast because there's so much that got rolling in
Oh,
both of our brains and communities.
she's
What?
she's no longer named Quanon.
Stop it. Sine qua non. Oh my God. Yikes. Anyway, I'm moving on. So Jay and Miles are wonderful, and I wanted to plug specifically, not just necessarily the whole podcast. If you want to just sample something, I was the guest host, and we didn't plug this last time, which I should have, for the 500th episode of Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men. And if you want to just sample that pod, start with the 500th episode, I would actually recommend because the conversation we had about how the pod began, how it developed, how the relationship between Jay and Miles developed, I think it'll really intrigue you. And if you haven't listened to that podcast in a while, for one thing, shame on you. But for another thing, it was a good place to jump back in, especially given that recently it was announced that Jay and Miles will be concluding the podcast in the future. So I would recommend, even though they've been on for a long while, that dynamic duo has still got the juice. And I mean, we were all in tears by the end of the 500th episode interview that I did with them. They had me on to interview them about how the pod had gone, and it was really an honor. And I recommend checking out the 500th episode. I think it was called "People Who Stick Together" is what they ended up naming it after the Jean Grey quote from the new X-Men arc that I quoted a million years ago on this podcast. So, anyway, that's my
I
answer to that.
I do want to say, I when Jay and Miles announced that the podcast was ending, and Josie, I'm one of those people who should be shamed because I am so far behind on Jay and
I'm
Miles.
way far behind too. I told them that. They were like, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah, no, no, no. But I talked about a little on Blue Sky in a kind of teary reply about how I kind of not only does this podcast owe itself to Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, but basically, I mean, again, I even mentioned in our first episode that I only like the X-Men because of Jay and
Right.
Miles Explain the X-Men.
Right.
But Becca Petunia also owes herself to Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men because I'm really not sure I would have come out if it weren't for
Yeah.
following Jay's lead.
Yeah.
Jay wrote so intelligently about his transition, and that really got me thinking about it. But if you're a Grant
Yep.
Morrison's X-Men fan, you probably already know Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men. That's kind
Yeah.
of
I'm
like
trying to
me.
think of what's outside of our sphere.
It's kind of like me being on like you being like, Becca, what are some bands that are good? And me being like, okay,
Uh,
so there are these four British guys,
Stop.
John,
Stop it.
Ringo, Paul, and George. And you're gonna love some of the stuff that they've done.
You know what? You
Do
have
you
to
hear
do
this
that
little
every once
song?
in a while.
Do you hear this little song? Listen, it's funny because my spouse does not know the Beatles at all.
Is
This
that really true?
repeatedly,
Really?
really, this
Just didn't
repeat
get schooled in the Beatles.
no, I talk a lot actually about how growing up as a cishet man meant that I was
Right.
required to like classic rock, and now I'm kind of resentful of classic rock in a way that sort of belies the quality of the genre. But like
Mm-mm.
at this point, the only classic rock adjacent things I can listen to are like Bowie and Elton John because my brain is like, no, it's okay, they can hang.
See, here's the thing. We have the opposite problem in our marriage, which is my spouse was raised with mostly classical music except for the Beatles. There was a lot of Beatles in that household. So whenever I'm like feeling nostalgic and going, "Oh, I want to listen to some Beatles," it's often roundly rejected because that was sort of the only pop that was in the house. So, anyway, the point is, Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, great podcast. And I'm trying to think of other things that are
Well,
outside that sphere, but I'm not as well schooled in the current pod world, I will fully admit.
you know what I want to recommend actually
What's that?
is anyone who's interested in this stuff should follow Jessie Gender on Blue
Oh,
Sky. Her handle is Jessie Gender. That's Jessie with an IE, dot bluesky dot social. And she has done a lot with gender and Star Trek in YouTube videos and things like that. Definitely
word.
worth checking out her stuff. I think
I don't think
similarly,
who's done the really good gender in Star Wars stuff? Has anyone done that?
see,
I don't want,
you're the Star Wars girly.
I
I
know, but the thing is, I'm
I
not really a pod.
I only care about puppets and pod racing.
Right.
Everything
I know.
else in
I'm just.
Star Wars, I'm like, I don't know, guys. I
I had
mean,
this whole
this is
idea to write. If I had this whole idea about pod racing that I should run by you after this because pod racing is kind of its own hilarious thing on its own.
but
But I'm trying to think of who's doing the interesting trans stuff in that space on podcasts, and I don't know. But there's
Tilly Bridges, Tilly Bridges, who was also
yes.
like a gender consultant for Star Trek Prodigy and stuff. She's also terrific. You can find her, Tilly Bridges, Tilly at Tilly Bridges dot bluesky dot social. I've just
Oh
been into
wow.
Star Trek lately, so
Yeah, I'm having Star Wars fever lately, as in like a chronic disease that I suffered through, which is every few months I remember that I love Star Wars and start consuming too much of it.
here's my
It looks
problem
like
though.
yeah, go on.
We started Voyager and I didn't really enjoy Voyager. And then I'm like, oh no, I can't tell people I don't enjoy Voyager. They're going to think I don't enjoy Voyager because I don't think a woman can be in command.
Oh, yikes. Ouch. Yeah. Well, at least Star Trek has not much female representation going that far back. It's a little rocky for early Star Wars in terms of how much representation there is of any women talking other than Princess Leia, but that's a whole separate question.
I have a friend who's a Chinese immigrant.
Mhm.
She moved here for grad school. So like she moved here as a full adult, and she knew nothing about Star Wars, and she and her
Yeah,
husband have
weirdly
been
not big in China. I learned that like a decade ago, bizarrely. But go on, yes.
we're it's funny how far afield we're getting, but you know what? This is just an
Who
episode where
cares? It's a
people
Q and
can.
A episode. We're
Yeah,
just
exactly.
messing around.
So her husband is her husband who is a white native native born American. Um,
Yeah,
he has been showing her Star Wars very gradually, and
interesting.
she and I were chatting the other day, and I was like, it's a real problem that there aren't that many women, and she's like,
Yeah,
exactly.
no kidding.
Josie, she's the one who didn't understand why Boba Fett was cool and was like, so he's like Diddy Kong that I was
He's
telling
like
you
Diddy
about.
Kong. There's nothing I love more than total outsider perspectives on my scripture, which is Star Wars.
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
she was surprised to learn that Vader was Luke's father.
Hey, great. Wow,
That
going in that blind. Damn.
completely blindsided her. Like that's how blind we're talking here.
The question that I always ask people who saw Star Wars when it came out in 77, who saw it in the theater with no background whatsoever and nothing afterward, and James Earl Jones not in the original credits, I always ask, did you think Darth Vader was black? And it's so interesting. You get a wide variety of answers.
Well,
Like,
Josie,
yeah.
he is black. Like that's what color.
Well, yes, if you're a smart aleck, that's what people
I
say.
don't know if you have a strange type of color blindness where you can't
Yes.
distinguish
Oh,
values,
Lord.
but
Okay,
his suit is
fine.
black. That's how you know he's part of the dark side. Anyway, continue.
Well, but that's the interesting thing. Anyway, but now we're going far afield again.
So
Point being, yes. What do you want to say?
yeah, I was just gonna say, so there are a lot of fandoms where there are these kinds of discussions. Since the Muppets and Star Trek are things that I've been into either my whole
Yeah.
life or lately, those are the two that are coming to mind. But you know what? If anyone wants to let us know on Blue Sky about things we're forgetting, and certainly if there is a good gender in Star Wars podcast or whatever,
There
please.
appears to be, just from a cursory Google, a at least queer Star Wars podcast, which does have a great name. I have not listened to it, so I can't endorse it necessarily, but it's called Pink Milk,
Hmm.
as opposed to the blue milk that is served to Luke on his space breakfast in Star Wars 1977. Anyway, but
So
yes, do you want to move? Should we move to the second part of the
yeah, I'd like
question?
to. So Matt Shepard, right, talks about the metaphor, right? The mutant
The
metaphor.
mutant metaphor. Yes.
And he says the other is hard to articulate, but the metaphor is a big part of any discussion of X comics. And there's a tension that I think doesn't get addressed often. For me, the metaphor is about an oppressed minority that in the comics has the power to kill you by thinking about it and just chooses
Right.
not to. I know the
Right.
metaphor has a lot of resonance in various communities at various times, but one of the
Sure.
driving undercurrents, especially since Omega mutants became a thing, is that self-imposed restraint is the only thing that keeps the oppressed from absolutely obliterating the opposition.
Wow.
Even the
What a
Krak-
way to summarize
I
it.
know
That's
this is why I
very
wanted to read
interesting.
this whole question.
No, you're right. You're right. It's worth doing.
Even the Krakoa era separatist stuff, Boo, has a lot of writing hand wavium about why Jamie Braddock doesn't just wish Orkies into a black hole. And let me tell you, I'm really glad that Jamie Braddock didn't just disappear orkies because they're so important to so many of us in the community. Although
Okay.
admittedly, a lot of us do wish that our after an orky we would have a black hole. The dynamic changes when you take the metaphor and apply it to people who have almost no power in society,
That's correct.
like me, as opposed to people who can control minds and throw tanks and rewrite reality to suit their
This
whims.
is their whims.
The question, finally, is whether you're discussing the metaphor from the point of view of the mutants as they map onto an oppressed minority. Is that discussion coming from a place where you feel there is restrained power, or the idea of immense power being restrained a fantasy component that makes the metaphor palatable?
Wow.
That's a big
Man, that is
question.
such. I love the first one that like I'm stumped on just because I don't listen to enough podcasts. And this one is just deals with a philosophical set of
I
questions
mean,
and about power relationships that are hard to answer.
I've said a lot that I kind of hate the metaphor.
Sure, when you
Um,
start mapping it one to one onto any community, it
well,
always gets tough.
And obviously, you do too much metaphor, and that's when you get that, Charles Xavier is Martin Luther King. And
Right,
Magneto, I
right,
don't
and
know if you
all
know
this
this,
stuff.
Josie. I don't know if you know this, but Magneto is kind of
Uh,
like Malcolm X.
Malcolm X. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
I'm
Right.
kidding. I'm
That's how
kidding.
it gets
Fuck that
problematic. We all
metaphor.
know. We
But
all know there's
because
your
I
opinions.
always say that I hate this because the whole thing about racism in the real world, racism and discrimination of any kind, is that it is inherently baseless, right? That's why it is this cruel, why it is so cruel is because, like, again, there really is no difference between black people and white people. And obviously, there are race
Sure, yeah.
scientists and whatever
Certainly
who are like,
there's no difference at a like spin the dice human nature level. Like obviously as communities they have different outcomes and different
well,
histories, et cetera. But yeah.
I mean, at a fundamental, like,
Right.
biological level, like
We're all humans.
anyone who's
Right.
like white people are smarter or black
Right.
people are better at this or whatever. It's like, no, that is
It's all dumb.
racism, right?
Yeah.
That is not based on scientific truth.
Right.
And the same is true of gender, and the same is true of us trans people, right? Like I don't
Right.
do anything. I host an X-Men podcast.
Among
Um,
other things, but yes,
among
yeah.
other things, but like, whereas, like, so if somebody is afraid of black people, or is afraid of trans people, or is afraid
Yeah.
of gay people, it is 100% just cruel, right? It is 100% just cruel. But if
Well, if
you're,
you're punching down, yeah, I mean, the traditional definition of racism is among leftists at least is that like you kind of can't be racist against white people per se because even if it's a category error that you're making, it's the power relationship is built in racism to punch down. Like
but
that's the
if,
point of racism.
but if I'm afraid of Legion, it feels a
Right.
little different.
It's
And
different. Yes.
and that idea of restrained power is something that I don't like, where it's like where the metaphor kind of leads to the necessity of the model minority, where it's like
Right.
again, where it's like we have to be on our best behavior or else they would have a reason to hate us.
Right, exactly. Which is something, I mean,
And let me
well,
tell
yeah,
you,
go ahead, go ahead.
one day I hope we get to X-Men Red so we can watch Jean Grey brainwash Cassandra Nova.
I'm very excited, yes.
Because that arc is a confusing one. But X-Men Red is basically like, what if we were the model minority? Is the plot of that comic. Jean Grey is like, we need to do this the right way. And that's a little troubling to me. Admittedly, I never read the end
Sure,
of it. Maybe Jean Grey is proven wrong, but
we may have an excuse to do all of this and we'll have a completely different take on it. But yes, the model minority problem certainly comes up if you're dealing with the mutant metaphor as a one-to-one, because on a one-to-one, then you're saying the mutants are inherently better or at least more powerful than Homo sapiens. And therefore, the only thing that should, their only real check is that they choose not to raise the world. They choose not to kill everybody. And that's a real problem because here's the thing. For me, one of the things that has come through over the course of these conversations is how much this experience has mapped somewhat, not one to one. Again, it never works as a one to one, somewhat better as a story about Jewish Americans, or at least a lot of Jews post World War II. Because it certainly doesn't work necessarily for Black people or for queers who have seen the amount of material like destruction power that any individual person has probably go down. But there's been this weird phenomenon of a lot of Jews are now in positions of power, and as we see, as a Jew myself, I have this very uncomfortable feeling all the time when Stephen Miller does something went awful, when anybody who comes out of my community who now has positions of unbelievable power does some, and the thing is, the trouble is Jews are still a minority that is very small, and that a lot of people, ironically, in the White House would also like to exterminate. You know, you have a lot of actual outright Nazis in there and in that MAGA movement. So, and it does not map one to one, but I think if the metaphor makes you uncomfortable, I think part of what makes people uncomfortable about it is there's this sort of Jewish coded aspect of it that is sometimes apparent when it comes to Magneto, sometimes coded when it comes to Krakoa, which, although Jonathan Hickman, as far as I know, has never said it, obviously it's partially a commentary on Israel. And Genosha under Claremont, who is Jewish, also, commenting on a lot of this stuff, basing Magneto and Ben and Charles in some ways on Menachem Begin and David Ben Gurion, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't work as a one to one. It doesn't work as a one to one. And if you start using it as a one to one, then you're saying all Jews have superpowers, all Jews have access to that power, and then it becomes very dangerous and effed up. So I do think it has the power to like make you wonder if it's done in an interesting way, but just using the mutant metaphor as an empowerment metaphor, I think is dangerous if you really start going down that road. Maybe just in passing as a way to reference something, you can be like, yeah, this is kind of the X-Men approach or whatever. But I think it's dangerous to start really identifying a given population with mutants as depicted in the Marvel universe.
I mean, I was just going to say, and you kind of touched on it, but it does make sense that, and I'm also Jewish. I think we've both said that repeatedly on the podcast, but let's stress that here.
It's important too, I think. Yeah, but go on.
It does make sense. Again, because Claremont is A, Jewish, and B, lived in didn't Claremont live in Israel for some
Yeah, he
time
was
as
on a,
well?
he was on a kibbutz a few years before he started writing the X-Men and knew a lot of Holocaust survivors there. That was a lot of the inspiration for Magneto, was being in this place where you have this separatist project and you also have a lot of people who are victims of a horrible genocide and managed to survive.
Well, so I'm just saying it definitely tracks that
Yeah.
that coding would come through because that's so near and dear. I'm not sure I understand Matt Shepard's question here, and I hope we're touching on it in a way that satisfies him. But I will say I don't believe that I hate any idea where restraining power and restraining who you are needs to be necessary. Because
Yeah.
again, that idea, and I joke about this all the time with my friends, where I like to do a character where I'm a trans grifter, a right-wing trans
Oh
grifter.
dear.
I'll just we'll just be hanging out like at a barbecue or whatever, and I'll put on my
Yeah.
right-wing trans grifter voice. And like
Oh
the
no.
idea that I can do things the right way, again, to bring it back to Jean Grey, where it's like if I just
I would be a
follow
right kind of Tran.
if I
Yeah.
just follow their rules and I transition the way they told me
Right.
to,
They want
then
me
I will
to.
be fine. And if you're listening and you're part of our community, you're definitely thinking of specific women right now when I say this,
Nah, but
and
no
I'm
need to
not going
name
to name
anybody.
them. You can
Don't want to
think
draw
of them.
anybody down that path. Yeah,
You can think
exactly.
of them. But that way will never work, right? That way will never work. And I don't love anything that seems to lionize that attitude. But the X-Men
Yeah.
has to lionize that attitude because again, Cyclops being able to shoot beams out of his eyes is something that needs to be restrained. If I wear a
Yeah,
dress everywhere I go, things are mostly the same. If Cyclops just walks around shooting a beam out of his face constantly, that's a
right.
problem. The thing that makes
Yeah,
Cyclops unique needs to be restrained, whereas the thing that makes me unique should never be restrained because it's never going to work.
right. And I think the important part is that unfortunately, the thing that makes you different in the Marvel Universe in this metaphor also gives you the power. The two things are conflated, and by conflating them, you end up with something dangerous where it just turns into saying that, because yes, difference can be power, and that diversity is power, and infinite diversity, infinite combinations, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that like you being oppressed is what gives you your power, and certainly does not give you a blanket license to exert power against other people just because you were oppressed. So I'll leave it at that. We should probably move on to another question, but
Yeah,
like,
hoo boy. Thank you, Matt. I really
thank you, Matt. You
appreciate
give
it.
us a lot to chew on.
I hope we answered your question somewhat okay. And let's move on to some people who messaged us on Blue Sky. Um,
Yes.
so Ben at Franz Ferdinand 2 asks, over the course of your comics reading life, which X-Men characters have you changed your opinion on the most?
Wow. Yeah.
I mean,
Do
I
you want
got
to
an
take this one?
answer. I can
Yeah,
take it
you go ahead.
first.
Now, you take it first. I was really this one was really I was struggling with because I've changed my opinions about all of them so much. But you go. It's like there are very few characters that I've had like a consistent view of, especially because you read so many bad comics in which they're depicted that you can't help but like start to get irritated with even your favorites.
Well,
But you
this
go
is
first.
this is part of the thing, and I feel like this is one of my complaints with Western comics. And by Western comics, I mean, let me be 100% clear. I mean, with Marvel and DC comics,
Yeah,
is
the
the
big two. Yeah,
idea that, if anyone can tell these stories, there's something exciting about that. Like, obviously, I'm a big fan of things like fanfic and whatever. But like if
sure.
anyone can tell these stories and these stories are on equal footing, then this means, again, that you're gonna run into problems where if a character does, it's literally it's like why they had to retcon Magneto to have been
Yeah,
Zorn the whole time, because it's like if someone else disagrees with a presentation of a character, then that all has to change. Like that can't change. Planet X will always have happened. So it's tough to
right.
sometimes think about the characters consistently because they're not consistent, right? Like they can't be because they're written by different people over the course of 60 years and all that and
60
all that.
plus. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And again, it's like literally the problem. Again, I remember this being such a controversy with Ant-Man, right? And Ant-Man hitting Jan hitting the Wasp, his
Yeah.
wife. And like
Hank
there's no
Pym,
getting
yeah.
out of that once it happens, but it was just one writer who wrote that, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that everything written like, but also it happened in canon and you're
This is
stuck
the
with
trouble
it,
with canon. Yeah, you're sort of
and
stuck with
you
it.
run into this weird knot where it's like,
And you can move on from it, but you have so many writers who get hired who are like, the most interesting thing about Hank Pym was that time he hit his wife, and you're like, oh God, is that really the most interesting thing about in a multiverse of a million iterations of
well,
Hank Pym? You got to go back to
admittedly,
that.
admittedly, I'd argue there's almost nothing interesting about Hank Pym. But
I would argue that you're largely right, but yeah, but go on. Yes.
the character that I feel like the X-Men character I've definitely changed the most on over the years, and I think I talk about this a little on the podcast, Here Comes Tomorrow.
Oh, yes.
That's what we're listening to,
Mm.
is Emma Frost. Because I think
Oh, good
as
answer.
I became more comfortable in my sexuality and my gender, I became a lot more comfortable with Emma Frost. Emma Frost
Very
made me
interesting.
Emma Frost made me feel things for a very long time, and I don't
Sure.
mean like Emma Frost gave me a boner or whatever. It's complicated when you're trans.
Right, but like there was a lot of political. It is, Emma. I can totally see that. We've talked about that a little, but I'd love to hear more.
Because you don't even know what you're feeling when you're deep in the closet like I was, right? But I literally just there's a certain performative like, well, I know I don't want to say that I like Emma Frost just because she's hot. So if
Right.
I like Emma Frost, I must be wrong to like Emma Frost. Emma Frost must only exist to be
Right.
hot, and I'm not a creep, so I don't like
So
Emma
I gotta back
Frost.
off from standing Emma Frost. Right.
And admittedly, Emma Frost is frequently written by men, and
Yeah, and frequently written poorly.
there certainly
Yeah,
is a lot of cheesecakeness to how she's portrayed, but that sort of like bitchy, and I'm using that word with love here, bitchy, mean girl aesthetic is something that I find really enjoyable. And I think there's a
sure.
lot of depth to that bitchy, mean girl aesthetic, contrasted with someone who genuinely cares about her students and her community.
Yeah,
And
and
I
she's a
think
self-made woman, as we discussed in, I can't even remember which episode it was now. You know, the whole backdrop of Emma is that she was born into money and then she lost all of it. And she sort of had to remake her entire identity out of nothing. And I think there are a lot of trans women who can look at the Emma Frost story. And although she's technically cis, once you've actually dealt with your shit and come out, there's a lot about Emma that rings very true. So I can see how that would be a big changing character for you. For me, I'll say similarly when it comes to it being a character who is written inconsistently, but also who I had to kind of come to a journey on and therefore had a lot of change with, and that's Magneto. That's Eric. Max Eisenhardt, whatever you want to call the primary antagonist of the X-Men, who is sometimes the protagonist. And I'd been familiar with Magneto from the earliest days of me even knowing about the X-Men because of X-Men 92. I've talked about this, but I think I had a VHS of Pride of the X-Men even before that. So like I wasn't super into the X-Men yet, but like Magneto with that Kirby helmet and the floatiness, you can't help but be a little compelled by him. And then as time went on, I started reading the comics and became very interested in him during a bizarre period of his continuity where there was like Joseph was the main Magneto that was available. Joseph being like sort of Magneto's son, but not really, kind of. Anyway, I found him very interesting, and then the Morrison run happened, and I have to say a lot has changed in the way I feel about Magneto as the world has gotten worse. And as I have seen the outcomes of separatism and militant separatism. So it's sort of these two things at once. Like you see a lot of people saying Magneto was right, which used to be a phrase that was just said by like me and my, best friend who is now also a trans girl. When we were both in the closet and as teenagers, we thought it was sort of like a cool thing to say. There was like a code phrase between us and like other people who read the X-Men, which was not many in our community. And now, God, Magneto was right. Not only was it the title of an episode of X-Men 97, but even before that, the reason they made it the title was it become this real code phrase among a lot of people. They're just because A, there are more X-Men fans, they're more in touch with each other online, but also B, because we've gotten to a world where people who used to think of themselves as moderates or liberals or centrists have felt themselves radicalized to a more militant perspective when it comes to overthrowing the power structure. And they start saying Magneto was right. They start feeling like Quentin. And I get it. But like, I guess I had my Magneto was right phase when I was a teenager. But the trouble is, as has been said on the aforementioned Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, you can't be as reductive as saying Magneto was right because there's so many Magnetos and there are so many things that he did to get to your point, Becca, about continuity that it's like, what are you even saying when you say Magneto was right? And yet you can't look away. It's impossible to look away from Eric. He's such a compelling character, and especially if you're Jewish, you cannot help but be compelled by this bad Jew. this guy who does the stuff you're not supposed to do and is angry in the ways that you sometimes find yourself angry. And the trouble is, it's such a hard character to over or a easy character to over identify with, and then kind of a hard character to deprogram yourself from. But I've had to do a fair amount of that because I was a little young radical, and I still am radical in a lot of ways. But I think one of the most amazing parts of what's been happening in the United States right now in resistance to the Trump regime has been how nonviolent everybody's been. It's kind of amazing. Like they really want to instigate something, and the answer has not been the Magneto response. Like it's been such a. I've watched Magneto be wrong and Charles weirdly in some ways be right this whole past year of awfulness in the United States. I keep seeing that like what actually mobilizes people is what actually weirdly what gets them to sound like Magneto when it comes to fascism. What gets them to start going, we have to, start having, public trials and there should be executions, et cetera, et cetera. You hear people who used to identify as liberals and centrists saying that, who aren't even reading the X-Men. They're just saying that about the Trump regime. And it starts to bring up these, I think, very generative questions that I wish and hope we can see in X-Men stories in the future about whether there is some kind of synthesis that can be found between Magneto and Charles, because you have these sort of Charles types sounding like Magneto, but using Charles-y tactics in order to achieve the goals they want to see, which is protecting their community and hopefully overthrowing this awful, illegitimate stuff. And I, I don't know. The past year has given me a whole new perspective on Magneto, not just because of this podcast, but because of seeing the ways nonviolent, inclusive resistance has been key to keeping fascism at bay. I think it's a really wonderful thing to see. And it's been more of a vindication of Charles in some ways, or at least a vindication of a synthesis of Charles and Eric than anything else, I thought. Anyway, should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, so this is from Asimov Fangirl, at Asimov dash Fangirl. And Asimov Fangirl writes, "Hello, I've been enjoying the podcast. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Although I have a more positive reading of the Krakoa era,
Many do.
your comments on the failing of some of those comics have been insightful. Now the question: which character or storyline would you like Morrison to have focused or written more about?"
Oh God. That's that. I was just thinking, I was sitting walking the other day and I was thinking about how great it'd be to teleport across the street. And I was remembering that Kurt Nightcrawler really only appears as this like kind of parody character at the end. Like the most of what we see of Kurt in, correct me if I'm wrong, Becca, here, is Nightcrawler is like at the end is when Beast as the Beast has created these awful little crawlers.
That's it.
It's this kind of yeah, it's just this mockery of what is a really rich, interesting character
He
that I kind of wish Morrison had spent time on.
he's in some other books at the same time.
I know, but still, yeah,
I believe he is in New Mutants Volume 2, which was concurrent to
yeah.
this. But
But I'm saying like the Morrison touch in particular, I think would have been very
I think
interesting
Morrison
for
could have done
Kurt.
a lot, absolutely, with Kurt. I mean, my answer is depends on, I'm taking the focused on part a little bit more because I think I simultaneously wish and don't wish that Morrison had spent some more time with Dust. And by that, I
Oh,
mean maybe
yes.
spent some more time in a library or
Yeah.
talking to a brown person.
Yeah, or a Muslim or anything. Yeah, no, I
But
agree.
it
Because
is,
Dust has so much potential, sort of on paper, and I wish there had been more focus put on like actually learning how to use a character like that.
and I think there is an interesting idea where again, we talk about it where dust is introduced and it's problematic, and then dust just kind of remains in stasis until the last arc or second to last arc. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, maybe think a little bit more about that. Asimov Fangirl also has a question that isn't about the X-Men, but is very specific, especially to you, Josie,
Oh, yes.
which is what is the protocol if you want to get something signed from a trans comic book creator, but it has their previous or dead name on it?
Dead name. Yeah.
The
Best thing would be
best
get a new
thing
edition with the current name. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yes. Go ahead.
the best thing would be to get a new edition with their current name, but sometimes that isn't available. So, Josie, you are a published author. I
I am a
am
published
not.
author. Yes. I don't know about comic book creators. I can't speak for every trans comic book creator. I can say, as a trans author, I do not care as long as you are buying a copy of the book. And in fact, you are helping me. I don't know if Asimov Fangirl was referencing me, but my first book, True Believer, which is the most relevant one to this podcast, because it's a biography of Stan Lee, the longtime editor of Marvel Comics and
Oh,
co-creator of the
that's
X-Men.
Stanley.
Bad Stanley, right? We actually didn't talk about all that much on our
No,
pod,
I know.
but he's relevant. That book, there is an alternate cover with an alternate edition that's expanded that we are waiting to hit the stands with, but they have to sell out of the previous version with my dead name first before they can justify. I like had the option to say like, let's pulp all of the existing copies, but I would have been like a huge cost, and I just decided not to. So I can only speak for myself when I say I do not care. If you are buying a copy of True Believer or my second book, Ringmaster, which has like a sort of dead name on it because I was like transitioning as the book was getting produced, it was very complicated. I don't care. I will sign it with my signature, which has not changed because my signature has no relation to letters anymore. My signature is basically just like some scribble that like I have to maintain because the bank will be suspicious of me if I change it. So, come on down. I am totally fine with anything with my dead name being brought to sign for me, but it's a very conscientious question that you asked. If a newer edition is available, then you can definitely try and get that one. Like as soon as this newer edition of True Believer is available, I'm going to tell everybody please buy that one. But we have to buy up the old stock first. The other thing you can do, sometimes people do this for me, and it's very cute. They'll like take some duct tape, and now and they'll
I
like
did
tape
this. I
over.
did this. I showed you.
Yeah, it's very cute.
I painted over your name, all pronouns,
So sweet.
all pronouns. I don't remember if I X'd out your headshot in one of
Oh, that's a
them.
good headshot though. That headshot.
Well,
Here's the thing.
you look more feminine in the headshot for Ringmaster because that was,
Ringmaster, because I had like
but
just transitioned.
yeah,
Yeah.
but and it was great too. And then I painted over it to say Josie Reisman. I
Thank
can
you.
I'll post pictures on Blue Sky. You can see.
Please do.
But I also, just for the record, crossed out a certain blurb written, a
Oh,
certain
thank God. Yeah.
critic quote written by.
Not going to mention who, but this is one of the reasons why you need to buy it. Please, I am so begging you. I don't care if you
Not trying to
deface the book.
bring up bad memories, Josie. It was a
No,
different
no,
time.
it was a different time. No, I did not know, but the paperback of True Believer has a cover blurb from someone who I do not want to have associated with the brand at all, who I denounce, who I don't want to name just because I don't want to bring bad vibes and mojo here. But if you are
Mojo isn't in this
no,
arc.
Mojo's not in this arc. That's correct. It would be really helpful if you bought up the stock of the paperbacks that have the bad blurb and the dead name, and then you can do whatever the hell you want to those books. I do not care. You can deface them as much as you want. They'll make them collector's items. I don't care. But like, oftentimes, the reason you haven't seen a new edition with the creator's current name is because the old stock has not been bought up yet. So it's worth asking if you're concerned, but I think the answer most of the time from most comic creators is going to be, give me the money and I will you if you know I'm trans and I know I'm trans, who cares? I'm getting royalties or earning back my advance.
So I think also, I'm not, I am trans, but I'm not a published writer. Everything I've written has been online. But, the first thing is it's going to be different for different trans creators, right? Like that is obvious. Josie and I can't speak for the entire community,
No, 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 definitely not.
but I genuinely think that most writers, especially published writers, understand. We understand I mean I'm a writer, just not a publisher. Anyway,
Keep going. Yeah.
we understand that you bought this book at a different time, or it's the
Yeah.
only copy available.
Right.
We understand that you are not actively dead naming us by asking you
No.
to sign it, right? Especially if you walk up and you're like, "Hey, Becca, I don't care if you show me, again, like
Right.
something that said my dead name on it because I wrote it, 20 years ago or whatever." And
Right.
and I think also we understand that, Josie, obviously everyone buy multiple copies of True Believer, buy all the
Oh, thank you.
copies, build a little house out of them that your cat can sleep in.
Perfect.
But like I also understand that money is short and money is tight and
Yeah.
all these things. I can't imagine any trans creator being like, excuse me, why didn't you buy a second identical copy of this book?
No, money
Why
is so
didn't
tight for creatives right now.
why
They're just
didn't
gonna be
you
happy.
why didn't you buy a second copy of this? Like, no, I didn't buy a second copy of this because, like, have you seen how
Comics are
expensive everything is?
expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would say certainly the tape idea, or again, like if you've got paint pens like me, is a
Yeah.
funny solution that I think most artists and writers would really approve.
Would be okay. All right, let's keep going here.
Moving
Good
on,
stuff here.
my pal Rex Thrillho
Woo!
at Evan Brady, he asks, "How would you ladies fix the Henry McCoy problem and make my
Capital THMP.
yes,
This is very a big problem. Yes.
and make my problematic fave not so problematic?"
I can't fix the Henry.
I didn't know there was a Henry McCoy problem.
Well, Henry McCoy problem, I think, is the fact that he has been. I guess I don't know exactly what Evan's talking to. I was assuming it was kind of what happens to Hank in the way he's portrayed in the years basically since the Morrison run. And some of the seeds of that you can argue are planted in the Morrison run with this depiction of the far future beast being this kind of crazed manipulator, and the idea that like the school passed to Beast and that was a bad thing. This is all stuff in that alternate universe. So the Hank McCoy problem, I think, is that for the past 25 odd years, 20 odd years, he keeps getting written almost as this villainous character. Like before you had Dark Beast from the alternate universe, that probably also had an influence on the way people were starting to conceive of him. But like I
He's
just
definitely some kind of horned demon during Schism. There's also an alternate future beast. That alternate
right.
future Jean Grey, who is now alternate future Zorn, has to stop. It's
It's too
comics.
much.
But
I know comics, everybody, but
you
yeah,
know
I
what I
mean,
think they could do to fix him?
what's that?
He should have come out for real.
I think so. I actually agree. And I'm completely with you. If they ever really want to be serious about making Hank McCoy new, interesting, and redeemable, have Hank McCoy come out and say, I am actually queer or trans or whatever that identity is, and I'm gonna have to deal with the intersectionality of that. And I'm gonna have to deal with all the stuff I did because I was closeted and didn't know what I was doing in my life. That would be very interesting.
I think what the problem is that Beast is such a fun character. And you know where Beast was at his best was honestly
What's that?
when he was an Avenger. The Beast Wonder Man friendship was so good.
Everyone always says this, and it's true. Beast as an Avenger in this sort of like interregnum was a great
Oh,
time.
great word, interregnum. That's how we fix
Yeah.
Beast. We make him say interregnum. No, but
On the
I
yeah, well,
I think part of the problem is there's a real struggle to find compelling plots Beast can do that aren't Beast becomes an evil mad scientist. Like,
yes.
I think that people struggle, and I think again, to bring up Schism, I think we kind of see that in Schism with Young Beast, where Young Beast and Young Angel are definitely the worst served of the
Oh
time
yeah.
shifted characters because
Big time.
Young Scott spends a lot of time dealing with what is obviously coded as autism, but also coded with I am in the future going to kill Charles Xavier, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I don't feel about that.
Jean Grey has a lot of coping with. I hate that my future role is apparently just to die over and over again. When do I get to live? And like that's what
Yeah.
the Jean Grey solo series was kind of about.
Right.
And Iceman, obviously, they did a lot with Teen Iceman. Beast learns how to be a wizard, and that is the only notable thing that happens to time displaced Beast. Um,
Except present day Beast is one who time displaces them in the first place, which is a dick move that like is part
right,
of the Hank McCoy
which is also
problem.
part of the Hank McCoy problem. I think they need to find Beast something else that he can do besides mad science. And
You know what I liked?
you know what's
Oh, go ahead.
something
You go
else?
ahead.
You know what's something else he could do?
What's that?
Wonder Man.
That is a thing he could do quite well. And I'm sure there's plenty of fic that would get very, very inspired about that now that Wonder Man is a television property, which I've not watched, but I hear good things about.
I hear it's
I was going
good,
to
yeah.
say, I hear it's good. I'm going to contradict myself and say the most interesting depiction of Beast for me since the Morrison run um, was actually Beast at his most, no, I'm not going to say most hetero, but it was Beast technically being hetero, kind of, in the absolutely wonderful and underrated Sword miniseries that
Ooh.
Kieran Gillen did with Steven Sanders.
But I mean,
Sword
Kieran
being
Gillen. And also, you know what I should have shouted out, speaking of Kieran,
what?
is when we were talking about restraining absolute
Oh,
power,
yeah.
is of course Kieran Gillen's new series Power Fantasy, which is
Yes, yes,
literally
which is very
about
much
that.
about that.
So if you want to see that explored, check it out.
Kieran, yeah, but Kieran wrote this Steven Sanders did
That was Kieran
great,
Gillen,
very
Power Fantasy, right? I'm not wrong.
looked it up to make sure, but I'm pretty sure it's him and isn't it him and Casper Wingard? More
Yes,
power.
yes. It is him and
I got it
Caspar
right. Okay.
Wingard.
Okay, I'm not going crazy. I thought that was
Yeah,
right.
no, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
My local shop owner has recommended it to me, and I love Kieran Gillen's other stuff.
Kieran is very talented.
I enjoyed Wicked and Divine. I feel like the critical tide has been shifting on Wicked Divine, I feel like, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, the point is, one of my first exposures to Kieran was this Sword miniseries, which came out like I want to say 2009 or something. It was a while. It was like during a period when I was not reading many comics, but I picked it up because the art looked so goofy. And it's so off model. Beast himself is drawn as though he's had like some sort of tertiary education evolution where he's like kind of a horse. And it's basically just a workplace comedy about the sentient world observation and research or whatever directorate, the Orbital Abigail Brand organization, and it's just like The Office in space, except Beast, who's coming up to give his girlfriend, as of then, Abigail Brand, like a birthday present, gets wrapped up in this whole crazy caper up in space. Like Death's Head 2 is there. It's great. I loved Beast in that, even though it was him kind of just be. But what I liked about him was they were using him as like a supporting character
Well,
in this kind of comical Frasier-y way.
leaning into the Frasier stuff wouldn't be a problem in
It
general.
wouldn't be a problem for
Um,
me. Do a Beast Frasier thing.
okay,
Fair
hold
point.
on, hold on. Abigail is definitely the Lilith.
Very much so.
Listen, some of us
Wait, who would be the Niles?
who would be the Niles. I mean,
Who's gonna be a
who's
Beast's
beasts,
Niles?
who's beasts most queer-coded bestie? Iceman. Niles is
Oh,
Iceman,
I could see that.
which means Kitty Pryde is Marist.
Oh, Maris, that would be good. Okay. I'm sold. I'm sold. That's how we're gonna
That's how we fix it.
fix the Henry McCoy program. More lead into the Kelsey Grammer
I
Association.
know that this is not the answer that Rex wanted, but like the answer is they need to find something else Beast can do other than science because we're tapped out on science. We're
It's so
tapped out on
boring
science.
now. He's done
All
science to the
science
point
can
where it's
cause you to
magic.
do, all science can get you to do is mad science. And
Right.
wizardry is not the answer either because in comics they're
Wizardry is
functionally
not
the
the
same.
answer. Wizardry is not the answer.
Listen, listen.
We should make stickers that say
Well, the problem is that's not my policy.
Wizardry is not the answer.
That's not my policy in my day-to-day life. My roller derby name is Miss Magus because I love
Oh,
wizards. But anyway, let's move on to some questions. Actually, I'm gonna save this next question for last
okay, great.
because it's a long one, and that way, if we have time. Harper Clockwork Anima at that Harper asks, "What are your thoughts on the Scott Jean Logan polycule?"
I like it. I think that you should do it in moderation. Like there's so many ways to write these characters, and I don't think they have to like canonically always be in a throuple. But I love seeing that I love seeing when that triangle gets closed. When you finally actually have Scott and Logan deal with their romantic tension. Now, unfortunately, you only really get that in fanfic and imagination. But, it was sort of implied in the Krakoa era, but they didn't really seal the deal on like making it.
Frankly, I don't count maps as canon. Like
Yeah,
we're
it was
grasping at
pushing it.
straws here. If we're like, they did it!
Yeah,
Queer representation! Three
but like
circles!
I know, but like come on, the point is like in your imagination and in the fanfic world, there have been a lot of stories that try to get Scott and Logan to figure out how they can not be at odds. And that's an interesting story to tell. So my thought on the Scott Jean Logan polycule is I wish somebody would actually canonically close that triangle in an interesting way. I can think of like 18 writers off the top of my head, but they're all like unemployable by Marvel these days. So, like I'd really want to see somebody actually show a romance between Scott and Logan.
I talk a little bit about this, and I think you're right that the Scott and Logan side is the more interesting one.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
and
who's not going to be in love with Jean? That's fine. That's
well, but that's
easy.
because I definitely talk about this in our whichever was the arc where they were in space, Logan and Jean.
Assault on Weapon Plus. Oh no, that's Planet X. Yeah, at the
Okay,
end.
that's right, it's during Planet X, where it's like I usually that is like the one time I like Logan and Jean together.
Yeah.
Because typically the Logan Jean stuff feels absolutely just like it's like, hey, the most popular male character has got to be with the hottest chick. That's how it
Right,
works.
right. That's how it
And
works. Yeah.
and that's absolutely how it feels a lot of the time. Where it's just like we are together because we are the main male character and the main female character.
Right.
Um, that book I think does it well. And one thing that I was thinking about actually is and we talk a little bit about it in Planet X, but how beautiful the parallel between them is that Logan's power is to live forever but bring death to everyone
Mm,
around him. And Jean's power is to die all the time but bring life to everyone
life to
around her.
everyone. Yeah.
And I think they talk a little bit Morrison talks a little bit about this, but I think I would love to see that parallel highlighted a little more in a future
Agreed.
comic. But I feel like whatever. I think it really depends on are you treating are you treating Jean as a character? And
Yes, as opposed to an object to be thought for.
a
Yeah.
lot of the time Jean is an object. A lot of the time
Yeah.
Jean is a sexy lamp, and she does a great job being a sexy lamp because she does glow. Moving on.
Okay, we got some via
We got a couple
Discord
more.
here.
Yeah, so from Discord. So Josie, our pal Silent TT,
Love Silent TT.
at Silent TT, that's got three T's in it, which is confusing, on Blue Sky. So Silent TT asks, how successful is this run in terms of what was laid out in the manifesto?
Very interesting. Not on a plot to plot beats hit, but in terms of the wider aims of refresh, rework, relaunch. Well, it's interesting. This is the great problem that we talked about it a little bit, but I think we will talk about it a lot more as we start dealing with the fallout and legacy
And when we do
of the
Bright New
Morrison run.
Morning, and when I
Well,
tie you
yes.
up, when I fly to Lisbon
Forced me to read the
to
whole
tie
Chuck
you up
Austin
and
run.
make you
Yeah.
read.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Am I allowed to say Lisbon on this
Yeah,
pod?
you can
Okay.
say where I live. Yeah, you can say where I live. I don't care. I don't.
At this point, yeah, I thought it was known. But
Yeah, it's
anyway,
pretty much out there. But the point is, the trouble is that this was a big refresh. It did rework some things, but did it relaunch it in the right direction, or did it relaunch itself just in a direction of stasis? Because that's the trouble, is even Morrison themselves said, I didn't know where to go. Like they
Right.
said, their comment was, by 2004, if I'd had to stay on the comic, the only thing I could come up with, and I actually do think this is an interesting idea, but they point out how it's
It's
kind of
not an interesting idea. It's
it's a
not.
dead end.
You're wrong.
Well, it's okay. I say it's an interesting idea in the way that like episode three, Revenge of the Sith, is an interesting idea. It's not a good movie,
Let's say
but
what the
like
interesting idea is for those people in the audience who don't remember.
the idea that Morrison said was like the only thing that they could come up with was Professor Xavier allows the first human to attend the Xavier Academy, and they find out that like the human's really good at the guitar or something. Like I think they were kind of making a joke about it, but like the point is that is really the only place that their story maybe could go, is to have full integration, which is alluded to in Here Comes Tomorrow, the four-issue jump ahead that concludes the whole thing as an epilogue, because it said that like, look, we reached this point where the X-Men had to open up to non-mutant members because the nature of alliances had changed, and it just that the axis was no longer human versus mutant; it was life versus supremacy of one organism, and I do think that Here Comes Tomorrow, which brings me to my answer to the question, which is I think the whole run, especially Here Comes Tomorrow, does leave the X-Men in an interesting place. And then the trouble is, because, and this happened, this is not Morrison's fault. It's not even really Marvel's fault, because this is just the nature of comics and pop culture. It's so iterative that when something works, everyone wants to be part of it. So it's sort of like the stuff that worked kind of kept working and got driven into the ground, or was immediately retconned out of existence because it was too radical.
I don't think Morrison created a sustainable X-Men thing.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
I don't think anyone, I mean, here's the thing. I don't think anyone managed to continue from where Morrison left off until Jonathan Hickman.
Basically, yeah. And Hickman basically just said, I haven't read anything since Morrison.
I like a lot of the post Morrison stuff. Again, it feels
Mhm.
like a joke, but I genuinely do like it when the X-Men split into the two groups and then the time
Sure.
displaced X-Men get involved and all of that.
I love a lot of, yeah,
There
but
was a really good, what was it, the Mutopia era, when they had like a secret base off the coast of Australia, and there was a great, I think it
yeah.
was actually Kieran Gillen at that point.
Yeah,
Great
Gillen
point.
and Fraction wrote
Yeah,
some good stuff there.
like
Yeah.
there's been some good stuff, but I think Morrison, I mean Morrison didn't even create something that they could continue. So
No.
did it rejuvenate the X-Men and make them cool and interesting? Yes,
Yes.
but I don't think Morrison wasn't really interested in sustainability.
No, Morrison was not going to create a new status quo that was like an
And
infinite play
and
box.
they couldn't even create an infinite status quo for themselves. And again, I'm not sure that that's what they wanted. That's not how they did Doom Patrol either. I didn't read
No.
Justice League, which I should, but it's just not exactly what they were interested in. So I don't think the manifesto was a failure from what Morrison said, but also it kind of was, because Morrison's idea was to breathe new life into the X-Men, and it's like, can you breathe new life into something for 3 years and then get rid of the new life?
I don't
Is
know. I mean, this is the trouble with Cape comics. They're all iterative, and you have to keep going. I mean, if something works, all that matters is, okay, well, it works, so let's keep doing it. But when I say works, sometimes they have the exact opposite response, where it'll be this worked too well, and therefore the goal of making it exciting has reached a point where it's so exciting that we can't really sustain it. So I don't know. To answer the question, how successful was the run in terms of what was laid out in the manifesto? I think Morrison was not claiming that they were going to create a new sustainable future. They just wanted to tell a rip-roaring story about old versus new. And I
right.
think they did tell a rip-roaring story about old versus new. And
No,
I think
that's
they
fair.
did inject new life into the franchise insofar as people started reading the X-Men again. I know I got more interested as that was happening. So I'd say it was pretty successful for the manifesto. Whether it was successful for the goal of creating a new future that was sustainable for the characters, that I don't know. Do we
Um,
want to skip ahead to? I know that we have a bunch of
yeah.
questions from
So
Silent
let's
TT who we
let's
love, but why don't we
let's
skip ahead? Yeah,
let's skip ahead because I feel like we kind of covered a lot of these things. Although I will say, how does glob smell?
great question.
Canonically like vegan cooking. Check out Jonathan Hickman's run on New X-Men
Well,
to
there you
learn
go.
all about Glob's tofu scramble recipe.
Yum 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 yum.
So this is from a friend of mine, David Levy. David Levy, co-host of the excellent Muppeturgy podcast.
I love David Levy. Yeah. Mhm.
David Levy at itsdlevy.me. And David asks, X-Men encompasses so many different characters, teams, settings, eras, genres. It's basically a whole universe unto itself. How do you think the X-Men ecosystem compares to the rest of the Marvel universe? And what is lost or gained when either one intrudes or crosses over with the other? In other words, beyond mutants, what makes X-Men comics X-Men comics? How are those
Mm.
distinct from other comics? And what happens when you get your chocolate on my peanut butter? This is a great question because
This is a great
going to be
question. Yeah, go
completely
ahead.
upfront with you, and I think Morrison absolutely agrees with me. The X-Men stop working when we remember that they exist in the broader Marvel universe.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
hundred
This is
percent.
going to be the,
And
this is going to be the great challenge. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Go
there's
ahead.
a reason that no non-X-Men characters appear at all in the Grant Morrison run, not even as a cameo.
Mm,
The closest exception is Sabra, who I guess you could argue is an Incredible Hulk character, but
kind of, but so is
but
Wolverine by that standard. But
I
yeah,
was just about to say, but by that logic, um,
yeah.
because it truly does not work. It truly does
No,
not work. The Marvel has tried time and time and time again to thread the needle of why the public loves the Fantastic Four but hates the X-Men. And frankly, it has
right.
never worked. It has
Nope.
never worked. And I'm saying this as the biggest fan of both of those series.
Sure.
I will say I was honestly I was heartbroken for a number of reasons. The largest one being that I don't like monopolies. But when Disney bought Fox and everybody was like, it's perfect now. The
Oh
X-Men can appear
God,
in an
can
Avengers
finally
movie.
meet the
I was
Avengers. I was
like,
like,
this is the last thing that I want. Because I
ugh,
really think, like
yeah,
David says, the X-Men is its own universe unto itself. And
yeah.
I don't know,
Its own multiverse unto itself. There's too much going on. You can't incorporate
and
other stuff.
the question here kind of becomes, right? The question here kind of becomes, what is that secret sauce? And, that secret sauce just, it is a secret. Like, what is it about the X-Men? Well, honestly, it's the Claremont ideas, right? Like, I
For
think
the most part, yeah,
what makes them work as sort of their own thing is the blueprint and framework and rigging that Claremont set up. And I don't necessarily know what makes that what makes that feel so different than the
yeah.
rest of the Marvel universe. I want to say it's the metaphor, but I feel a little dirty saying that after saying that the metaphor sucks.
Well, it's part the metaphor. I would say what makes X-Men Comics, or at least, you know what? I shouldn't say makes now, because I'm not as up to date as I should be. But when I was coming up, what made the X-Men different other than the metaphor, and the metaphor wasn't even what I gravitated to the most. What made them different was the infinite horizons of each individual character. Because more so than any other franchise, when I was coming up, the X-Men were the ones that played around in the multiverse. There were so many versions of every X character and so many versions of the X team and so many ways things could have gone. That was what made X-Men
Was
distinctive for me.
Days of Future Past effectively the first Marvel alternate universe story?
It
Obviously,
was it was one of the very first. I
DC
wrote
had
a whole
had
feature on it.
Flash of Two Worlds before that point, if I
Right.
recall.
No,
But
a lot, yeah, well before that. They had dealt with multiverses, but the idea of a abrupt time jump into a dystopian alternate future was very new. Like that was very much in the zeitgeist culturally as of then, what with Terminator in some ways and other things, but it was Days of Future Past. I recall writing a feature about this, which was the first occasion I had to interview Chris Claremont, but that was like, I don't know, 12 years ago now. He really was the beginning of that horizon in X-Men, certainly. I don't know about comics as a whole, but in X-Men, that was the beginning of saying, oh, we, and by we, I mean I, Chris Claremont, can sort of do whatever I want with these characters, especially once he started playing around with Excalibur and having Captain Britain in there. Then all of a sudden, you can have the infinite toy box that is Captain Britain and that continuity of multiverses.
I think that scope just feels so much bigger with the X-Men. And I don't literally just mean like the multiverse stuff. I mean the idea that anyone can be an X-Man. Like
Yeah,
the idea that there are new characters joining this team, whether they know it or not, every day
yeah, every day.
is so much bigger than the Fantastic Four, which I also love, than the
Yeah.
Avengers, which I also hate, than the Inhumans, which tried to do this and it was
Yeah,
confusing and weird. Um, and I think that that makes it just feel like such a more fruitful universe to play in. Now, again, I know people at home are like, Becca, don't you get it? The X-Men have been crossing over with the main Marvel universe forever. Didn't you read? And
sure.
it's like, yes, I did read. I read all of it. I read all of it. I read XVF. I read XVA,
IVX,
AVX,
IVX.
IVX,
I'll tell you the one time that it's worked for me was
Capcom versus X.
the one thing that's worked for me of integrating the X-Men into the larger Marvel universe. The only time it's worked for me was in Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross's, I should say Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek because it was sort of Alex Ross's main project, Marvels, the beautiful four-issue miniseries from the early 90s, early to mid 90s, that really I think is one of the greatest pieces of comic storytelling ever told. And in that, there's this very conscious choice that Busiek writes about in some of the back matter, where he was going through the continuity of the 60s Marvel comics and trying to make that continuity sync up and going, okay, so this event is referenced in Fantastic Four number whatever. And then the next event that happens that's referenced says, well, this editorial note, this happened right after X-Men number blah, blah, blah. So he tried to situate it and he found out the only way that you could make all the continuity play out was if Reed and Sue got married on the morning of the day that turned into the night of the first Sentinel attack. The only way to make that work was in the original Stan Lee continuity was if the night of the wedding the Sentinels go on a pogrom and start killing, like this huge celebrity wedding happens, and then these mutant killing monsters are sent out into the street to annihilate all mutants by nighttime. And that is a fascinating contrast, and it's done very well. But I don't think you can do it anymore. I think it's very difficult to make the current X-Men and the current rest of Marvel work.
I think it's so crucial that you're saying that this works because it is based just on the 1960s. And like I said,
Right,
I think that branching point is Chris Claremont, right? Like if you're looking at the stuff
right.
before Chris Claremont, it works better than the stuff after it works better than the stuff after Chris Claremont.
For integration into the larger continuity. Okay, so we got one
And
more question,
we
I
have one
think.
more. I'm gonna backtrack and I'm gonna make this faster. I'm gonna change Josh Gad's question a little bit. The Josh Gad. No, I'm kidding. The Blue Sky user Josh Gad will return in Avengers Doomsday. Um, at Storyteller Wes. Storyteller Wes wanted us to do like a whole draft here, but I don't think we really have time to do a whole draft. So Storyteller
No, I
Wes
don't.
basically says if you are able to create an X Team book of your own that has to have 6 members, who would you put on it? So Josie, first thought, best thought. If you were if you were this is how I live my life, Josephine Reisman. First thought, best thought. If you had to write an X-Men comic, who would be on it?
I haven't thought about this already. So Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Kitty Pryde. I'm really not thinking about this. Cyclops and Cable.
Okay,
I
so
would have to go back and read what I just said because I don't even remember what I said.
yeah, it's okay. So it was funny because I was thinking about this a little bit too. And bizarrely, most of my answers basically just felt like the New Mutants because I love the New Mutants so much. I love the New Mutants so much. So I think I would certainly have I would have said Kitty, but I'm not allowed to choose any of yours. So no
Oh, right,
Kitty.
right, right. Yes.
No Kitty, but certainly Ilyana and Moonstar are basically two of my
Hmm.
all-time favorite characters. So I would also have Swan, who of course is Karma.
Yes.
I would have her on the team. Wolf Spain. So that's just
Gotta
three
love
characters
Rain
because these are
Sinclair.
just my
Yeah.
favorites. And I guess I'm just doing girls because that's me.
That's
So I
fine.
don't know. I'll throw on Boom Boom. I'll throw
Oh,
on
hell
Boom Boom,
yeah.
who also kind of
Boomer.
counts as part of that New Mutants group. And I don't know, sixth person, Honey Badger. It's
Beautiful.
it's my New Mutants, who are all
Nuevo,
girls.
Novo,
Who are
Neo
all girls.
mutants.
No
Yes.
boys allowed.
No boys allowed it. Okay, that's a good. I like our two teams as a split off. I'd have to
Yes.
actually look at what we said, but that would be a fun little experiment. Okay, so I guess that sort of brings us to the end of this Q&A episode, doesn't it? Or do we have more?
No, that's it. That's it. And that's good because this is I know you've got places to be and our audience probably is getting a little sick of hearing our voices. Josie,
Yes.
do we know what we're going to do next? Again, we're still going a
Well,
little sporadically.
we're going to look sporadically. Yeah, what do you think we should do next? What do you think,
Well,
Becca?
we talked about potentially interviewing some folks.
We have some interviews that we have people who are willing to do them, and we just didn't have time in the initial beginning of the year that we thought we were going to. Um, One I will tease that we're definitely going to. I'm going to make sure we do, and I'm not going to give you any details on it because I want it to be a big discovery for everyone. Is we are going to talk to the writer and composer of X-Men the musical, which actually exists and is literally
The Still My Heart.
legally available for you to do if you are at a learning institution. We will talk about that later. So yeah, stay tuned to the feed and to the Blue Sky. We will tell people about when we're coming out with new episodes. But yeah, just stay subscribed. We'll be doing stuff sporadically, and then this summer we will record a whole season.
I already did my other podcast plug, but you can of course find me on Blue Sky at Tall Girl Petunia and my writing at toughpigs.com. Josie, where can people find you?
Yeah, I am at Josie.zone, like the Twilight Zone, everywhere. So it's Josie dot Zone. And that's my website, my Blue Sky handle, my Instagram handle, blah, 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 blah. And my new book.
Pre-orders. Yeah,
Right. Well,
yeah.
actually, I was about to say, if you go to Josie.zone, hopefully by the time this goes up, there will be a big splash page right there on the homepage for pre-orders and the cover of my upcoming new book, The Last Temptation of Beck, The Untold Story of a Pop Messiah, which is being published by Simon & Schuster's Atria imprint. That going to be coming out this fall, and hopefully the pre-order link will be up by the time I say you are hearing this episode, and you can just go to josie.zone and pre-order there.
As I like to say, something's coming, sky is purple. Yeah, you should absolutely check that out. And of course, you can follow this podcast at herecomestomorrow.net on Blue Sky or just herecomestomorrow.net. Please tell a
Yeah.
friend, hey, they can jump back in and listen to every Grant Morrison X-Men comic. Now's a great time.
All of our episodes are they're all evergreen. Like what you have to remember is that these are good to recycle because people are constantly coming to this comic or thinking about this comic. And although we talk sometimes about things that are vaguely in the news, all of those episodes are still listenable now. It's not like they're dated.
None of those news stories have ended, nor do I anticipate
No.
any of those news stories to end for a very long time.
Boy, anyway,
If you think peace in the Middle East is going to happen by the end of 2026, I have an X-Men comic to sell you.
hey, I weirder things have happened, but I think we should cut it off there unless you have more to say.
No, that's it.
Great. So until whenever we record next, remember everyone, burn away what doesn't work.